Tonight, a gunman holds a child hostage but frees another.
13 in hospital after Kent's worst crash this year.
The weapons that might have been intended for gang warfare.
And why tourists are threatening our heritage.
Good evening. Dozens of armed police are tonight surrounding a house at Hastings where a gunman is holding a boy hostage. The siege has been going on for 11 hours. For most of the day, 2 boys were being held, but one was released a short time ago. The siege followed a violent struggle in the house. Our reporter Paul Beard has been at the scene all day.
11 hours after it began, there's still only a glimmer of hope that an end to the siege is in sight. The movement came just before 4 o'clock when the older of the boys being held, Joseph Ellsworthy, was released. His worried parents have been waiting anxiously close by all day.
Following a period of extended negotiations between the man inside the house and the police negotiator, it was agreed that in return for an exchange of a packet of cigarettes, the eldest boy would be released. This has taken place. He was released about 10 minutes ago. He's safe and well and is currently being examined by a doctor.
From time to time, the gunman had been seen at a window of the house, and the child still being held has reportedly been watching television. Armed officers from the Sussex Special Operations Unit have moved into position, but otherwise things have remained much as they were when police were first called to the house at breakfast time. British Telecom engineers have been busily laying special phone lines so negotiations can proceed. So far, 2 specially trained negotiators have spoken to the man.
Well, now that we've obviously established a rapport between the negotiator and the person inside, it looks as if it's going well at this stage.
So any guesses yet when it will end?
Too early to say.
There's been no movement other than that of armed police near the house. Nearby residents have all been asked to remain indoors until the siege ends. Police say that the operation could continue all night and into the weekend. Paul Beard, Coast to Coast, Hastings.
Well, of course, Paul Beard is still there at the scene of the siege, and he should be with us now on the telephone. Paul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can indeed.
Paul, what's the situation now?
Well, there have been no new major developments. 12-year-old Rhett Bartlett is still being held, and the emphasis now is on getting him released. The police negotiators say one sticking point concerns Mr. Eastwood being on remand for an alleged robbery, and they want to stress to him, if he's watching, that any new evidence which might come to light will be carefully considered. But they say the most important thing at this stage is to let the boy go. They say they're prepared to negotiate with him for as long as it might take. And one development which happened just minutes ago is that the mother of the boy being held was led away to an ambulance. Mrs. Bartlett was clearly distressed, and you could see a head wound quite clearly, which she suffered earlier. The whole area here, meanwhile, of course, remains cordoned off. There are barriers across the road in front of me, and an ambulance and fire appliance are standing by should they be needed.
OK, Paul, well, obviously you'll be staying there. If there are any further developments, we'll come back to you during the programme. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, meanwhile, another siege in Sussex has ended after 4 hours. Armed officers were called to a house in Hove where 2 teenage girls claimed they were sexually assaulted. 3 men left the house without a struggle, and 2 are being questioned tonight.
13 people have been hurt in a pile-up on a busy Kent road. It happened this afternoon on the A229 at Bluebell Hill near Maidstone. The accident brought roads to a standstill within a 10-mile radius. Hugh Kirby was among the first on the scene.
The worst crash in Kent this year transformed one of its main arteries, the A229, into a scene of absolute chaos. A coach, a lorry and 10 cars reduced to a mass of twisted metal. 5 of those injured were on board the coach, which was returning from Dover with mainly elderly holidaymakers on board. The Kent Air ambulance made 2 trips to lift a husband and wife to hospital. Ironically, the coach driver had diverted along this road to avoid an accident jamming the nearby M2. Incredibly, the driver of this car escaped with just a scratch.
I was driving along down here on the 229. I looked at my wing mirror and I saw the coach just coming down the middle of the carriageway. Next thing I knew, it had gone straight into the back of me and veered off me into a lorry.
Department of Transport crash investigators will examine the theory that the brakes on the coach failed. 5 of the injured were taken to Maidstone Hospital, the rest to the Medway Accident Centre. At one stage, more than 40 emergency rescue workers were on the scene.
We've also got a problem on the M20 with a lorry there that shed its load. The knock-on effect is tremendous. I should imagine that both the Medway towns and Maidstone are absolutely lock solid. We would ask motorists to be patient and to try and find an alternative route.
It's expected to be several hours before all the debris is finally cleared away. Hugh Kirby, Coast to Coast, Bluebell Hill.
Police in Essex have raided a recreation ground and seized an array of weapons, including knives and an imitation gun. More than 30 youths were arrested and are due to appear in court later this afternoon. Mark Bishop has been to see the weapons that were put on display by the police.
These are just some of the weapons seized by police at an isolated car park at Horndon-on-the-Hill recreation ground near Grays in Essex. The weaponry includes a club hammer, wrench and cosh. A collection of knives were also recovered, as well as this imitation handgun. 34 youths had gathered at the car park on the outskirts of Horndon-on-the-Hill at just after 9 p.m. last night. It's thought they were waiting to fight another rival gang, but the fight never took place. Police were tipped off by a local resident. An hour later, all 34 members of the gang were arrested.
It is a frightening thought that there was the potential there for a serious fight and these weapons to be used in it. Our investigations so far lead us to think that we have arrested one element of the possible confrontation that was to take place, yes.
Where did the weapons come from?
Your guess is as good as mine, I'm afraid. Some of them, as you can see, are sports equipment readily available, pieces of tubing. You can lay your hands on them, but they had obviously gone out and sorted themselves out with the armoury that you've seen.
One woman who lives nearby gave her account of what had happened.
My girl's got to work, you know.
Were people fighting?
Yeah, we're having an argument and taking on there.
Quite frightening.
Yes, so we just kept quiet.
Did you phone the police?
No, because the time we'd seen it, the police were there.
Would you say it's a dangerous area to live in round here?
It is, because you get people and jobbers and that come.
After the arrest, police stayed on at the car park hoping to intercept the other gang, but they never arrived. Tonight, police are praising the resident who initially tipped them off. Mark Bishop, Coast to Coast, Horndon-on-the-Hill.
Well, we've just heard that 34 youths have now appeared in court accused of breaching the peace, and they've all been bound over. Liz.
Mid Sussex Water Company has been fined £20,000 for polluting supplies to the village of Firle. Shareholders will bear the cost of the fine, but customers may have to pay for the £300,000 clean-up. And the polluted water source will take hundreds of years to run clean. Kate Roberts was in court.
The villagers of Firle near Lewes were without tap water for 2 weeks after 1,500 gallons of diesel oil flooded into the water supply last November. Mid-Sussex Water were prosecuted by the National Rivers Authority and admitted causing the pollution. It happened when an underground pipe at Seaford pumping station burst. The pipe linked an oil tank to a generator. The court was told all but 18 inches of the pipe were covered in plastic sheeting. The exposed part had corroded and oil leaked into underground wells directly below. It could be years before the water source is rid of the contamination. The judge rejected accusations that the company dragged their feet in responding to the emergency, but he found them guilty of culpable negligence by not recognising soon enough the inherent dangers of using underground pipes. He fined them £20,000 and ordered them to pay £5,000 costs. Mid-Sussex Water said the fine would be paid by the shareholders, but the cost of the clean-up, estimated to be £250,000, could be passed on to the consumer.
That cost is a notified item and can be passed on in charges subject to the investigation by the Director General.
The result of the prosecution was welcomed by the National Rivers Authority.
Well, we're very pleased with the case as a whole. We're very pleased that it's come out into the open, that the public can see that we're very concerned about the state of both underground and overground waters, and that the consequences of pollution have been given a very good airing.
Meanwhile, the villagers of Firle have to be content with £25 compensation paid to every household affected by the pollution. Kate Roberts, Coast to Coast, Lewes.
A coach driver who fell asleep and crashed on the M25, injuring 3 day trippers, has been banned from driving for 6 years. Raymond Fleming from Basildon was also given a 6-month jail sentence, suspended for 2 years and fined £1,000. He admitted reckless driving and driving while over the alcohol limit. 2 people were injured in a crash involving 3 cars and a lorry on the Thanet Way in Kent. A woman driver suffered a broken arm. A second driver has internal and head injuries. And police set up diversions around the M20 in Kent after a lorry carrying a mechanical digger hit a bridge at Aylesford. The accident blocked the London-bound carriageway between junctions 5 and 6, causing a 5-mile traffic tailback. Staff at Canterbury Jail have accepted an offer by the prison governor to ease a crisis over manning levels. The prison will get an extra 10 officers to help supervise inmates. But the Canterbury Prison Officers Association fears it won't solve serious overcrowding at the jail.
3 Channel tunnel workers have been injured in 2 separate accidents in the tunnel workings at Shakespeare Cliff. A driver suffered a fractured collarbone when 2 locomotives crashed in a service tunnel, causing corrosive chemicals to spill. And 2 workers suffered smoke inhalation after fire broke out in the main running tunnel. Orsett Hospital's accident and emergency unit will close despite an intensive protest campaign. The government agreed to the closure so that Basildon and Thurrock Health Authority can save £800,000. Casualty facilities will now be concentrated at Basildon Hospital, 10 miles away. The Princess Royal turned truck driver to officially open a multi-million-pound superport. It's at the Isle of Grain in Kent and cost £140 million. Thamesport is built on the site of a former BP oil refinery, which had its own royal visit, which was from the Queen, 35 years ago.
A leading publican in Essex says pubs shouldn't have to employ any black people behind the bar. He says it can upset customers. Well, that astonishing proposal was put forward in an answer to a survey by the Commission for Racial Equality. The survey was into the extent of racial discrimination in Southend. The most damning conclusion was against accommodation agencies. Of 12 agencies questioned, 6 of them discriminated against black people. Well, that statistic and the remarks by the publican have angered the Commission. In a moment we'll be talking to them. But first, Richard Brock reports.
Roy Luckett's comments threatened to stir up a massive argument in and around Southend. Mr. Luckett is a chairman of the Licensed Victuallers Association for the whole of the South East. He wants the Race Relations Act changed for publicans. He maintains that in predominantly white pubs, coloured bar staff can cause problems.
You must remember that every business must run its own best way to suit its clientele, and if the clientele do not want that sort of person behind the bar, much the same as any other type of person that would not be behind the bar that doesn't conform with what should be done, I think that would cause more problems. And I think we in the licensed trade are trying to conform with the law and keeping law and order in the country. We are the front line of everything, and we are trying to do just that.
But what you're saying is blatant discrimination.
I wouldn't say it's blatant discrimination at all. I mean, surely the customer is entitled to an opinion, and what the Race Relations Board is saying that they shouldn't have an opinion. They have called my customers racial bigots, and I don't think that is correct. My customers are allowed to have an opinion, and if they don't want to see that behind the bar, that's fine.
However, Mr. Luckett's views were regarded with disdain by pubgoers in Southend.
It doesn't matter who it is serving you the drink, black, white, whatever, Japanese. I mean, we're all just like humans, so, you know, how can you complain?
Mr. Luckett spoke following a damning report by the Commission for Racial Equality. They investigated 12 house-letting agencies in Southend. 6 discriminated against people from ethnic minorities. One letting agency told Coast to Coast that some landlords put a whites-only instruction on premises. It's a form of undercover racism which seems less prominent on the streets of the town.
We haven't really come across it that often. I mean, occasionally you get people going past calling you Packy in the street or something like that, but generally, no.
People walking past, just call your names and they'll just walk off again.
Is it common?
Not really.
Even so, this report and Mr. Luckett's comments have put a question mark over the whole race relations issue in the area. Richard Brock, Coast to Coast, Southend.
Well, joined from London now by Sally Grubb of the Commission for Racial Equality. Sally, what do you make of the results in Southend? It sounds as though racial prejudice is alive and well and living at the seaside.
Yes, certainly amongst accommodation agencies that is the case, although Southend wasn't as bad as, say, for example, Ealing in London, where almost half of the agencies were discriminating. We did find agencies discriminating in Southend, and on our first test, we did a maximum of 3 tests. On our first test, half of the agencies we tested discriminated against our testers.
Is there anything you can do in practical terms to stop landlords discriminating? You probably never even hear about it because they'll make some other excuse, won't they?
Well, exactly. The title of our report is Sorry It's Gone, and I think that describes it very aptly. What we intend to do is to approach the accommodation agencies, particularly because they become the agents of the landlords, and we want them to adopt recommendations which will prevent discrimination in the future, particularly to tell their staff and make sure their staff understand that they cannot take instructions from landlords where they're racially discriminatory instructions. And if they don't follow that advice, then they may find themselves in court.
And finally, after 25 years of anti-racist legislation in Britain, what do you make of the landlord who says, well, we should be exempt from having to be equal opportunity employers? We shouldn't have to have black people serving behind our bars, for instance, because in a white area it drives the customers away. Can you believe that?
I find it very hard to believe, and I find it an extraordinary attitude in this day and age. The other point is that it's highly insulting to people in Southend to suggest that they wouldn't want to be served by people simply because of the colour of their skin. The other point is that we've had 25 years of race legislation, and such behaviour is highly illegal. I would strongly advise publicans to disregard this sort of advice, and if they do follow it, they would leave themselves open to prosecution.
Indeed. Sally Grubb, thank you very much indeed.
Well, the ancient monuments and much-loved tourist spots of the southeast are being worn away by the enthusiastic attentions of too many visitors. In Canterbury today, the head of the government's tourism task force was told the city can't cope with the swelling numbers of tourists. David Forsdyke joined the throng.
A regular Friday afternoon in Canterbury and a handful of the 2.25 million modern pilgrims who each year want to see the city. The problem is, they're wearing the place away. The city is one of the most popular places in the country, and it's paying the price.
It's not just the physical fabric. There are grooves in the streets between our coach park and the cathedral itself. There is the graffiti, the vandalism, the litter problems that such mass numbers, they harm the environment if that number keeps on growing.
Joining the visitors today, the head of the government's task force trying to defend the country's fabric from tourism wear. Ivor Manley's been told to find out how to preserve what's left of the country's heritage, to save it from the millions of people who arrive to spend money looking for old England.
Vast numbers are going to wear out stones and require more maintenance. So you have to think in terms of how, without destroying the quality of the experience, you can minimise that kind of damage.
The main casualty in Canterbury is the cathedral, which is literally being ground down by millions of feet. Stone floors worn smooth by time and the tread of tourists.
We want people to come because a lot of people come thinking this is a historic monument only. It is a church, and we hope that, in fact, some of the atmosphere will rub off on them.
Not too much of it rub off.
No, no, indeed.
Cathedral officials have told the government's task force they're trying to stop the wear by managing groups more effectively. And city officials say there may come a time when the only way into Canterbury will be by ticket through turnstiles. They say it's about the only way to control the crowds. David Forsyth, Coast to Coast, Canterbury.
Well, now on to a local attraction as yet untrampled by an overlarge number of admirers. Andy Steggall.
What do you want? Thanks, Liz. We start tonight with cricket and that crucial Britannic Championship match between Essex and Kent. Every run and every wicket counts at Chelmsford as second place Essex try to make up an 11-point deficit on leaders Middlesex. All week Kent have stood in their way, but today it was a different story.
Australian Mark Waugh cruised to his 8th century of the season yesterday. Today he looked just as ominous. But on 169 he fell to Tim Wren. Richard Davis with the catch. Then Mark Ilott took up the charge. And it was spectacular stuff, taking title-chasing Essex to a first innings lead. They reached 508, ahead by 99. And that without the injured Graham Gooch. And Eilert continued with his success, this time with the ball. Nasser Hussain's catch dismissing Trevor Ward for just 7 runs.
And the latest score from Chelmsford, Kent are 172 for 4, a lead of 73. Meanwhile, at the other end of the table, the sad story continues for the bottom side, Sussex. They lost by an innings and 86 runs to Gloucestershire at Bristol. But if cricket is going through a lean time in that county, golf at least is booming. The exclusive East Sussex National Course has a simple ambition: to become the premier tournament venue in Britain. It took the first step down that road this week by hosting a competition for some of the country's top professionals. Both the East Sussex National and some of the top players in Europe were flexing their competitive muscle for the first time on the course. Brighton's Chris Moody, a past tour winner, enjoying the experience at the Motorola Classic. Paul Broadhurst, another European regular, set off as overnight leader and would end the day at 3 under. The Greens were getting a close inspection from an influential voice in British golf, Neil Coles. If they pass his scrutiny, the omens are good for big events to come. And if the club's organisation were looking for a thumbs up from the playing elite, then they could be satisfied. Ryder Cup player Brian Barnes was already impressed.
It looks as though it's a mature golf course now. Within a year, it looks as though the thing's been down for 5 or 6 years. But in 5 or 6 years' time, of course, it'll just be unbelievable.
One of our goals is to become synonymous with competitive golf and certainly attract some major tournaments to East Sussex National and to the Southeast. And this is a very good first step for us to get 4 rounds played and some competitive golf here and get started. So we're very excited.
And their ultimate ambitions are in sight. Robert Lee showing how the course can be played. He's 6 under par, tournament leader and favourite to win this East Sussex first. Well, time now to look at the prospects in store for our football teams this weekend. Simon Moore begins his roundup with the man defenders are beginning to fear.
Brett Angel has picked up at Southend where David Crown left off, scoring goals. He's got 5 for the 3rd Division side this season.
It takes a little bit of pressure off when fans are expecting you to score, and you come to a new club and perhaps you don't settle in as quickly, and I am surprised how quickly I've settled in and things are going well on the pitch.
And Angel will have no mercy on Preston at Roots Hall tonight. Gillingham's Steve Lovell is another man with 5 goals to his name. 3 of them from penalties. He's in action at Scarborough tomorrow. For 4th Division neighbours Maidstone, it's a chance for revenge on Scunthorpe. The Northerners stole a point at Watling Street last season. The Kent club will want no repeat tomorrow. Goalkeeper Tony Miola has kept everyone guessing this week. The American World Cup star was meant to be staying at 2nd Division Brighton. But now he's set to sign for Watford. Perry Digweed will continue in goal for the home game with Charlton.
Well, also in action this weekend are the Maidstone Pumas American football team. The Kent side have reached the semi-final of the British Youth Championships. They play the Manchester Colts at Lincoln on Sunday. Already celebrating are the Weald of Kent Anglers. They've won the Benson Hedges International Fly Fishing Championship at Rutland Water, taking the gold medal with a total catch of 14 trout. That's it from sport. Back to the ones that got away.
We never do get away. We don't get very far anyway. Ron Lobeck got away for a couple of days this week, but has now been recaptured in order to do Friday's weather. Ron.
Thanks very much, and I'm pleased to say that Bill has kept the high-pressure system going. Temperatures across most of the region reached 20 today. In fact, I suspect in 1 or 2 places it was a degree or 2 higher. Looking at the satellite sequence over the last 24 hours, there's still the frontal systems out to the west. As they come southeastwards, they're getting acted upon by that high-pressure system, decreasing the activity. Thundery activity over western France and quite cloudy down across Portugal in association with the complex area of low pressure. But it's the broad band of high pressure that continues to produce problems in terms of no significant rainfall, and that pattern is fairly well established and is going to be with us throughout the weekend. By noon tomorrow, the high will be again the main feature. Fog and mist patches are going to be developing in many places, so if you do have to travel in the early hours of the morning, take care, as I keep saying. That high is going to be with us for some time, but tonight temperatures down to about 8 Celsius, so not a particularly chilly night, but then again not a particularly warm night. And again, fog and mist patches developing, more particularly in central parts of Sussex and the Weald of Kent, because down the east side of Kent and the Essex and across the Essex coast, the light northerly winds are likely to continue with variable amounts of cloud coming down later in the night. So that will tend to clear any fog that may form early on that part of the world. Tomorrow, temperatures getting up to about 20 Celsius, a good warm sunny day, the winds becoming a little more northeasterly coming in off the North Sea. As I said, the best of the weather looks as though it'll be down towards the south coast, south of the Downs, where mostly it'll be sunny for most of the day. But even in other parts of Kent and Essex, although there'll be variable amounts of cloud around, it'll also be very warm and very pleasant. Looking ahead for the next couple of days, sunny and warm seems to be the story. Tuesday there is again just a suggestion that it may become cloudy with some rain moving down. Certainly it'll be very welcome. So there are lots of weddings taking place tomorrow. I can't mention them all, unfortunately, but here's a little selection. Alison and Philip, Nicola and Peter, Charlize and Keith, Fiona and Andrew, Melanie and Robert, Claire and Paul, Margaret and Roy. Happy day to you, and good weather for the photographs, I should think, and for all the others. The very many who are getting married. It makes me wonder if they're expecting a really cold winter. Picture tonight, it comes from Angela Fawley of Chiddingly Primary. So with a pleasant weekend in view, back to Mike.
Thanks, Ron. And to recap on that siege at Hastings before we go, armed police are still surrounding the house where a gunman is holding a boy hostage. Another boy was earlier released. The boy's mother has also been brought out of the house. She's waiting in a nearby ambulance. Liz.
And just a reminder of those traffic problems. There are still hold-ups on Bluebell Hill, the M20 and part of the M2 following those earlier accidents we mentioned. Police are appealing to motorists to avoid congested areas if at all possible.
And that's it from us tonight. Mind how you go. Have a nice weekend.
Good night.
Bye-bye.